All right, everybody, welcome to episode 111 of the world's greatest podcasts, according to Slate, the podcast that shall not be mentioned by the press, apparently.
What do you mean? They just did a profile on us.
Well, they did. This is the conundrum. It's so much of a phenomenon that we're the number one business and the number one tech podcast in the world, hands down, that the press has a hard time giving us any oxygen because they want to hate us. They want to cover it.
You're saying they take the ideas, but not the...
They don't want to cite it.
They don't want to cite it.
They don't want to cite it. But anyway, shout out to Slate.
Yeah, what I thought was interesting was the guy pointed out that we don't want to subject ourselves to independent journalists asking us independent questions. Therefore, we go direct, and that's kind of the thing nowadays. When everyone says they want to go direct, it's because they don't want to be subject to independent journalists.
Well, one might ask themselves why subjects don't want to go direct.
Yeah, exactly.
You mean don't want to go to journalists?
Yeah, because there's a specific reason why principals, the subject of stories, do not want to have the press interpret what they're saying is because they don't feel they're getting a fair shake. They feel like the words are being twisted.
The challenge is that then we avoid independent scrutiny of our points of view and our decisions.
No, we don't. They're constantly writing hit pieces about us. The question is, when we want to present our side of it, do we need to go through their filter or not? Why would you go through their filter when it's always going to be a hit piece?
Right.
Well, and
they have a class hatred of technology entrepreneurs.
I think
investors.
it's just you, Sacks.
You're right, J. Cal. They don't hate you because you genuflect to their political biases. You see, if you do what SBF did, which is basically agree with all of their biases, then yes, they'll treat you better. That's the deal. That's how it works.
And when you say they, you're referring to specific large media outlets, right, Sacks?
They all think the left. He's not referring to Fox and Tucker.
Okay, you can name one. I'll tell you what, I'll trade you Fox for MSNBC and CNN and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic Magazine, and on and on and on. You get a lot of mileage out of being able to name Fox. The fact of the matter is...
Megyn Kelly? Mm-hmm.
That's a podcaster. She's independent now.
Yeah, that's true.
You can name one, literally one outlet that is not part of this, mainstream media. And they all think the same way. There are very small differences in the way they think.
It's all about clicks. It's all about clicks at this point, and it's all about
not
advocacy
just about
journalism
clicks.
And advocacy. It's that combination.
What you're calling advocacy is bias and activism. It's activism.
That's what I'm talking about. Activism journalism. Yes.
I think Draymond also highlights a really important point, which is he started his podcast. It's become one of the most popular forms of sports media, and he can speak directly without the filtering and classification that's done by the journalist, and it seems to be a really powerful trend. The audience really wants to hear direct, and they want to hear unfiltered, raw points of view. And maybe there's still a role for, I think, the journalism separate from that, which is to then scrutinize and analyze and question and.
It's not journalism; it's just activism. They're just activists. Look,
there are also journalists out there, Sacks, right? So
actually, it depends what the topic is and what the outlet is, but.
Right. Fair enough.
But I would argue that most of these journalists are doing what they're doing for the same reason that we're doing what we're doing, which is they want to have some kind of influence because they don't get paid very much, right? But the way they have influence is to push a specific political agenda. They're activists. They're basically party activists. It has
become advocacy journalism. Yes, that's the term I coined for it. It's advocacy journalism.
Did you guys see this brouhaha where Matt Iglesias wrote this article about the Fed and about the debt ceiling? And through this whole multi-100-word, 1,000-word tome, he didn't understand the difference between a percentage point and a basis point, and then couldn't calculate the interest correctly.
Yeah, I did see that.
Yeah. Wow. So wait a second. You're saying the Fed's raising 25%?
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge difference between
my mortgage is going up 25%.
Between a principal and an outside analyst, right? Like a principal has a better grasp typically of the topics and the material. But, the argument from a journalist...
He's considered within the journalist circle. He's considered the conventional wisdom.
I get it, but the argument from a journalist is that by having that direct access, that person is also biased. Because they're an agent, because they're a player on the field, they do have a point of view and they do have a direction they want to take things. So it is a fair commentary that journalists can theoretically play a role, which is they're an off-field analyst and don't necessarily bring a bias.
I would argue they're less educated and more biased than we are.
That may or may not be true, what the two of you guys are debating, which is a very subjective take. But the thing that is categorical and you can't deny is that there is zero checks and balances when something as simple as the basis point, percentage point difference isn't caught in proofreading, isn't caught by any editor, isn't caught by the people that, help them review this. And so what that says is all kinds of trash must get through, because there's no way for the average person on Twitter to police all of this nonsensical content. This one was easy because it was so numerically illiterate that it just stood out. But can you imagine the number of unforced errors journalists make today in their search for clicks that don't get caught out, that may actually tip somebody to think A versus B? That's, I think, the thing that's kind of undeniable.
Right.
Yeah.
You
What was
only
the
need
Rolling
to.
Stone article?
There's a very simple test for this. If you read the journalists writing about a topic you are an expert on, whatever the topic happens to be, you start to understand, okay, well, on that story I'm reading, that they understand about 10 or 20 or 30% of what's going on. But then when you read stories that you're not involved in, you read a story about Hollywood or, I don't know, pick an industry or a region you're not super aware of, you're like, okay, well, that must be 100% correct. And the truth is, journalists have access to
there's a name for
5 to
that.
20. There is a name for it, yeah.
It's called the Gell-Mann amnesia effect. You just plagiarize Michael Crichton, who came up with that.
Yeah, so
But no, he's exactly right. But I think it's worse than that. It's because now the mistakes aren't being driven just by sloppiness or laziness or just a lack of expertise. I think it's being driven by an agenda. So just to give you an example on the Slate thing, the Slate article actually wasn't bad. It kind of made us seem, cool. The subheadline was a close listen to All In, the infuriating, fascinating, safe space for Silicon Valley's money men. Okay. But the headline changed. So I don't know if you guys noticed this. The headline now is Elon Musk's inner circle is telling us exactly what it thinks. First of all, they're trying
Elon for clicks. It's
Elon for so they're trying way too hard to describe us in terms of Elon, which, is maybe 2 episodes out of 110. But before inner circle, the word they used was cronies. And then somebody edited it because I saw cronies in one of those tweet, summaries. Mm-hmm. Where it does a capsule or whatever. Yeah. So, and those get frozen in time. So, they were trying to bash us even harder, and then somebody took another look at it and toned it down.
Here's what happened. I'll tell you what happens in the editorial process. Whoever writes the article gets submitted. Maybe it gets edited, proofread, whatever. Maybe it doesn't even in some publications. They don't have the time for it because they're in a race. Then they pick, there's somebody who's really good at social media. They pick 6 or 7 headlines. They A/B test them. And they even have software for this, where they will run a test. Sometimes they'll do a paid test. They put $5 in ads on social media. Whichever one performs the best, that's the one they go with. So it's even more cynical. And because people who read the headlines, sometimes they don't read the story, right? Obviously, most people just see the headline. They interpret that as a story. That's why I told you when they did that New Republic piece on you with that horrific monstrosity of an illustration, don't worry about it. People just read the headline. They know you're important. Nobody reads the story anyway.
No, but it wasn't a bad article, actually.
It was well written, actually. I was in shock. I was like, who is this writer that actually took the time to write some prose that was actually decent?
Yeah, he had listened to a lot of episodes, clearly.
That was a really good moment, actually. That was great advice because you gave it to him and you gave it to me because both of us had these things. And Jason said the same thing. Just look at the picture. And if you're okay with the picture, just move on. And I thought, this can't be true. And it turned out to mostly be true.
Yeah, but my picture was terrible.
Yeah, but it's close to reality. So, jeez. The person who did the worst there was Peter Thiel. Poor Peter.
But that just shows how ridiculously biased it is, right?
My picture wasn't
so bad.
Hugh Grant. Elon, pull that up one more time here. Elon looks like Hugh Grant. Actually, it's kind of
he does.
Kind of not bad. Kind of looks like Hugh Grant in Notting Hill.
I knew that article was going to be fine when the first, item they presented as evidence of me doing something wrong was basically helping to oust Chesa Boudin, which was something that was supported by 70% of San Francisco, which is a 90% Democratic city. So not exactly evidence of some, out of control right-wing movement.
Look at the headline. The Quiet Political Rise of David Sacks, Silicon Valley's Prophet of Urban Doom. I'm just letting you know, people don't get past the 6th word in the image.
Yeah.
It's 99% of people are like, oh my God, congrats on the, Republic article. It could have literally been Laurel, what do they call them? Laurel ipsums, like it could have just been filler words from their second graph down and nobody would know.
Yeah. But now apparently if you notice that San Francisco streets look like, Walking Dead, that apparently you're a prophet of urban doom. I mean, these people are so out of touch. I mean, they can't even acknowledge what people can see with their own eyes.
That's the bias that's gotten crazy. And